Welcome back to Small College Conversations. I am Anthony Grassi here, happy to turn the tables a little bit on the founder of BOSCA, Jim Abbott, to have a really interesting conversation about how administrators should handle presidential transitions on their campuses. Jim, thank you for joining me today.
Anthony, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
So we'll start big picture as somebody who sat in the chair for nearly 2 decades. What were, in the presidential transitions you've gone through throughout your career, what were some of the most significant differences you saw throughout each transition and how that impacted athletics?
It's a big question to start with. So I spent 19 years at one university, and I had four separate presidents. The president who hired me, really, as I reflect back on it, he was the best president, the best boss that I've ever had. We met regularly. He was interested in athletics. He was a sports fan. And all of that was really beneficial to what we did athletically. My second president was not a sports person. He was sort of a philosopher. He had been a former federal judge, and so he was more into the arts. He was into other areas, and I'll be honest and say it was kind of a uncertain time, for lack of a better way of putting it, for athletics. So, each one of these was different. The third president had been a trustee of the university, so she had some understanding of what we did and maybe some interest. But I would say the factor that maybe impacted this transition more than anything was not so much their inclination toward athletics as it may have been their experience and understanding of being a president at a small university. So they were all a little different, and all had sort of their challenges and advantages.
You mentioned, especially given the turnover we see in the president's chair across the country at all levels of higher education. Do you think, did you handle those differently if the backgrounds that each of those individuals had? And I guess as we think about how we would advise other individuals to handle a similar situation, if somebody's coming from a D1 school versus they're coming from within the division or association that they are a part of, should they handle those conversations and that initial transition differently?
I think the answer is yes. I mean, I think what the important thing that an athletic director can do in this transition is really be prepared to describe the role that athletics plays on that campus. We have a BOSCA Leadership Academy, and this is one of the exercises that we go through with the folks who participate. Is you have to be able to really communicate what it is that you do. Anthony, part of what you have to understand too is not every new president has been a president. Not every new president has even worked in higher education. Or maybe hasn't worked in higher education in a relevant role. So what I found about those early days with each of the presidents is it's dictated as much or more by the president than it would be me. I think you also have to understand that a lot of administrators, a lot of athletic directors still don't report directly to the president. Now, what I would say to that athletic director is whether you report to the president or not, you've got to find a way to position yourself to have a relationship there. But so the reality is when you're thinking about those early days, even as you're thinking about researching the incoming president, a lot of those interactions to begin that relationship are going to be dictated more by the president than they are by the athletic director.
And as we go kind of step by step through this transition process that an athletic director will see, we'll start from, I guess, you find out the president or chancellor of the institution is leaving. In your experience, what should be the first 1, 2, 3 steps that individual takes, whether that's relationships across campus, communication with stakeholders, internal, external? What should those first few steps be?
Yeah, I guess what I would say is that all better start before you find out they're leaving, because what we know is turnover is real. It's uncommon. I spent 19 years at Oklahoma City University. That doesn't happen as much anymore. And so my first president, I was with 8 years. The second one was maybe 6. The third was 4 or 5. And the fourth one was less than a year for me. So the advice that I would give you is don't wait till the president's leaving to create those strong bonds, particularly with members of the cabinet. So a lot of ADs are members of the university cabinet or the executive leadership team, whatever it's called. But I think that's an important group to be tied in with. I think those are people who can. The new president isn't just going to come to the AD and say, well, tell me how you're doing. Tell me what you do. They're going to talk to some of those other leaders on campus. They're going to talk to some of the trustees or regents to get their opinions. So it all ought to start before it ought to be part of how you run your department now. Solidifying those relationships, making sure that people understand the role and the value of athletics. If you wait until your president is leaving to try to position yourself, then in my opinion, you're too late.
And that point may start probably when that athletic director transitions into that chair. And what is through those conversations you're having with members of the cabinet, and again, whether the president or the AD reports to the president and or sits on the president's cabinet council, whatever you want to call it, what should the message in those conversations be to whether that person's overseeing, whether that's the provost or the person overseeing student affairs or anywhere in between, the message that they should be communicating to those internal stakeholders should be what?
Well, and it's not just messaging, it is more action. On a small university campus, athletics has got to play a big role. And that's why I kind of keep coming back to being able to describe your role. I don't want coaches who are merely staying over on the athletic side of campus or in the athletic facilities. On a small campus, we ought to be intertwined and ingrained in what's going on in all facets of the university. So, some of it is participating in cabinet meetings and helping provide strategy for the direction that the university ought to be going. The other part of it is really the educational piece, so that these other leaders, I think athletic directors have to spend a lot of time educating senior leadership as to what we do. Because obviously many people wonder, first of all, why would we even invest in athletics? They may think that coaches just show up for practice and a few games and that's all they do. They don't understand the role that they have to play in recruiting students who contribute to the bottom line of the university. They don't understand the need to monitor their academic progress. They don't understand the pressure to fundraise. And so all of those things go into what a coach does these days. And all of those efforts then contribute back to the institution. So I'm just a big proponent that you're bringing your expertise in running the athletic department and sharing those ideas for opportunities and strategies for the institution. I would often pipe up in cabinet meetings and say, look, I know I'm just the athletic director, but here's my idea. And I know I'm tiptoeing into the academic realm, but you don't pay me to just sit in these meetings. You pay me to offer my input and thoughts and advice. And so I think ADs and athletic administrators in general have to be active participants and have to embrace the idea that you are the visible sort of leader and mouthpiece for the athletic department. And it's just as important. Maybe it's more important to do that internally as it is externally. When we think about a mouthpiece, we think about me talking to a group of alums on the road somewhere. Well, what you can never forget is the biggest donor to the athletic department is the university. So you better spend just as much or more time cultivating those relationships, sharing your vision, and contributing to the mission internally as you do externally.
And you mentioned there the idea of you being the mouthpiece. Your coaches and your student athletes and the rest of your staff also serve as, well, maybe not the mouthpiece. They are different vessels for communication in the word of the athletic department, but also the values of the athletic department as it relates to the institution as a whole. You mentioned kind of having those individuals be present elsewhere on campus. When you were at Oklahoma City, how did you go about, I guess, pushing people to do that, whether that's coaches, administrators, maybe student athletes in certain capacities, to help sell basically or get that message out there across the university?
It's funny. My coaches would tell you that I often reminded them, our budget committee on campus was primarily faculty. And I would just say to them, if I go to the budget committee with a request and they don't know who the soccer coach is, then it's not going to go well for you. So, it sounds like I was trying to scare them into participating, but I had coaches who did it really well, who didn't really need any reminder from me. And I had coaches who were really very comfortable sort of staying in their lane in the arena and not getting out to the other areas of campus. But we would do things like we would have faculty meetings. So we would approach the faculty of the business school and the faculty of the College of Arts and Sciences and ask them for meetings, just so that we could hear any concerns that they had, so that we could share our thoughts, because we knew in our case that about 80% of our athletes studied in those two schools. But there are always events on campus, whether it's a chapel, whether it's a performing arts, a performance. There are always opportunities to be visible and engaged. And I think what I try to do as much as anything is remind people of those opportunities. And then when I saw committee, like staff council or other committee opportunities, I would always encourage our folks to raise their hand to try to participate.
As we talk about the development of administrators and coaches, how much of these conversations are just a different nature than what they may be used to? And how, I'm thinking of, the associate AD, the senior associate AD, the deputy AD across the country that may be thinking about, all right, I'm ready to step into becoming an AD, or I'm about ready to be in that position. I should have these kind of conversations now in my current institution, whether I become the AD here or somewhere else, so I can be better prepared to speak the same language, basically. Is that something you would recommend doing?
Absolutely. I mentioned our BOSCA Academy. We have a lot of people who participate in that are aspiring ADs. Even for me, the whole reason BOSCA exists is because when I became an AD, I realized relatively quickly how naive I had been about what it really meant. And what it really means is that athletics is just one piece of the larger organization. And not everybody understands. I mean, and for example, I don't understand what every other piece does. But the one person on campus who has to have their fingers on each of those areas is the president. If you aspire to lead an athletic department, whether you report directly to that person or through another vice president, you've got to have a relationship with the president, and you have to have a capability to understand the priorities of the institution beyond your department. I would say for coaches, that's the hardest thing. They are, more myopic in terms of their view doesn't always extend beyond the athletic department. But as we have looked at schools that are really struggling on the business side of things here lately, schools that are closing, most of those don't have any problem filling their athletic rosters. So the success of athletics is one piece that contributes to a healthy university, but it's not enough to create a healthy university. So if you want to lead at our level, then you better understand the larger scope of business, and you ought to be figuring out ways that you can lead a department in a way that it is a productive contributor across the board, which really means more than winning and losing and a much broader scope.
Now, as we transition to looking at once a new president or chancellor has been hired on campus, in your experience, when you were doing research on that individual, whether you knew them or not, what were the key items you sought to know before you first met with that person?
That's a great question. First of all, it's not always easy to research them. As I mentioned to you, we, Oklahoma City University in particular, was more willing to hire people outside of higher education. So I think what I'd say to you is if I'm at any university and I see a new president, Anthony is hired as our president, I would look at the school that he comes from. I was on campus at Indiana Wesleyan University this spring, and in the week before I was there and the week after, two of their cabinet members became college presidents. So one went to a small college in Nebraska, one is going to a small college in Oregon, I think. So if I was at either of those schools, I would probably look at who they are. I would look at the school they came from, Indiana Wesleyan, which just so happens to be one of the top 5 Directors Cup schools in the country. And I would maybe take a sigh of relief and think, okay, great, we're getting somebody who comes from an institution that has enjoyed athletic success. Then what I'm going to tell you, Anthony, is it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it doesn't mean a thing. What I would imagine is, so one of these individuals was the provost. So what I would imagine is the provost is going to come into my university, and what happened at their previous university may have very little effect. Number one, they're probably going to be overwhelmed. So I dealt with presidents like this, that it was clear to me they were not prepared to be a president. I'm not saying they didn't deserve the position. I'm just saying that kind of like what I felt when I started as an AD, they reacted in a similar way. They came from a profession outside of higher education, and they were overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed at the number of issues that you just have to deal with when you're running a college campus. So I think all of that to say that you can do your research. I mean, if they come from, in this example, if they come from Indiana Wesleyan, I would darn sure call the athletic director at Indiana Wesleyan and try to find out what I could find out. But I would also understand that even whether that person was particularly positive or particularly negative, I might weigh that, but I knew that I had to do my job to present myself, present my department, and to begin to establish my own relationship. And I would say the hardest part of that, again, is dependent upon how the president wants to approach it. So there are presidents in the world that don't want athletics reporting to them. They don't want their schedule full of meetings with provosts and advancement and athletics. And I'll just tell you in my example, my first boss, who I said was my best, we met every week. every Monday. We'd sit down, we'd drink coffee, and for the most part, we would spend the first half of the meeting just reflecting on whatever. And then we would reach a point where he would say, well, have you got anything for me? And my goal every week was to be able to say, no, we're good, nothing to be concerned about. It's not to say that I achieved that every time, but he was well-versed. He attended athletic events, and that was easy. My second president, we were together 6 or 8 years. We probably had private individual meetings 6 times. That was not his thing. He was not wanting to schedule individual meetings. I was on the cabinet, and we typically met once a week, but it was just a whole different style. As I mentioned, he was not an athletically oriented person, but where we got in the relationship was we got to the point where he looked at me and said, look, Jim, I trust you. You never bring me any problems. And more or less, you take care of that, and I'll worry about the other 80 things. I'm not saying that happened overnight, and there were some moments there where it was uncertain whether Jim Abbott would make it to 19 years at Oklahoma City University. But the point is that I think you can do some research, and you can gain some understanding, and you can find some commonalities, which is all of what I would always try to do with any relationship. But ultimately, you have to understand that knowing all of those, knowing those details, knowing where they came from, does not mean that that's the same person you're going to be dealing with day in and day out.
You mentioned that presentation to your president, presenting the value that athletics has. You walk into that first meeting, whether that's a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, after that person comes to campus or is named to that position. What are you walking into that meeting with? Actually, whether that's a physical, here's the budget, here's our priorities, or intangibles of maybe an attitude or of the vision that you're trying to sell, or question that you are asking to try to ascertain some of those points that you mentioned that you can try to figure out based on where they were previously or from people that have worked with them in the past, but you really don't know until you hear it straight from them.
Yeah. So the first meeting is either A, the items the president specifically asked you to bring, or B, I'm not bringing anything. I'm just going to listen, to introduce myself, talk about whatever the president desires to discuss. My fourth president, we had what we called a teach-in. And so, this was after COVID. It was done virtually, but each dean, each vice president was required to sort of, I can't remember if it was 15 or 20 minutes, but it was this description of the role. So we were given an assignment. Here's what we would like to hear from you. And what was interesting is that it wasn't just a private meeting with the president. The idea of this was, we're going to teach the president, we're going to help him understand more about each department on campus. But then every other vice president was encouraged to sit in if they wanted to sit in and listen and kind of see what other departments presented. So the answer is that the gist of that first meeting is going to be dictated more by the desires of the president than anything else. But either way, I would always be in a comfortable position, whether you gave me a warning about it or not, to talk about the role and the value of the athletic department, to talk about, challenges and opportunities that we might face, and certainly to talk about ways that athletics contributed significantly to the strategic priorities of the university.
And on those strategic priorities, how are you getting a feel for what their vision for athletics is? Because in a lot of these conversations, a lot of the things that a president can say, the action with any leader, the actions may not always match the words. And so they may say we're a big proponent of athletics. They may say it's the front porch of the university, but we want the front porch to be the best front porch that it possibly can be, not just a front porch. So how are you trying to determine maybe if there's a difference there?
That's a great question too, because it's, I would say in most cases for me, there was no immediately apparent position. My second president, the first president told me on his way out that he's going to be a little different. And what he was really telling me was he's not a sports person. He wasn't anti-sports, so he didn't come in saying, let's get rid of it. Truth be told, in a perfect world, he would have had us go Division III, because in his mind, not understanding the collegiate athletic landscape, in his mind, that was the pure form of athletics. He thinks he would have thought everyone is Emory University, or everyone is Williams or Pomona Pitzer. And the good news is, for us, well, guess what? If you want us to go D3, all you got to do is triple our budget and ask faculty to understand we're going to miss twice as many classes because there are no other Division III schools in Oklahoma. But I think the point is that there was always a little bit of prayer involved, because you never know. Every AD I talk to, when we sort of get into this area, there's a little bit of fingers crossed. Even presidents who might declare themselves as big sports fans may still find themselves in a campus environment that does not lend itself to doing anything special for athletics. And I would say that goes for most of us. So you got a president who's determined, man, I want to win. I want our athletic department to win games. And what we know is, well, great, that we just need more money. Let's just pay coaches more and fund more scholarships and build more facilities. So even if you have a president who is inclined toward athletics, they may not be in a position to move the needle in making that impact. So, I think the thing to understand with any relationship is it's long term. You're not going to win them over. I think I use the example of my wife a lot. I didn't win her over the first, week, and she determined I can't live without this guy. It takes some time. So identifying whether the new president is for you or against you, in my case, it took a while to figure that out. And honestly, I felt like even the one that I felt wasn't for me was eventually. It just took educating that president and being understanding of the pressures that the president faced and having to manage the entire organization.
And what were the things that you did to kind of get over that hump in that specific example? Because I imagine there are others that have been, are, or will be in a similar position.
I think it's the combination of everything that I've told you so far. So I suspect other cabinet members that the president relied on were able to tell him, hey, those guys, they do a good job over there. I think some of it was the sort of continued education of what this is really about. I think there were some real world examples that helped. And I'll give you one right now. That year, the president of the Student Senate was an athlete. So the president wasn't just listening to me say, here's all the great things that we're doing. He met regularly with the president of Student Senate. And it formed in him the opinion that if athletics is bringing this type of student to our institution, then they're doing something right. So I think the answer to your question is he had to come to that position on his own. But the sum of our culture and the work that we were doing helped lead him in that direction.
And Jim, I'll ask you this last, I guess, bigger question. What advice would you have for ADs to make sure that their goals for the athletic department that they have set align with the goals that a new leader puts in place?
It's a great question. Here's what I would say. In most cases, a new president is not going to come in and drastically change the direction of the institution. So most institutions have a strategic, I hope, have a strategic plan now. And typically university strategic plans are going to talk about, academic success and graduation and retention. And they're going to talk about community engagement. They're going to talk about fiscal and financial strength. And those are all areas that an athletic department now can create their own initiatives that contribute to each one of those. So it would, and then I'll just be honest, if you have a president who comes in and has a new idea, and I guess I had this from time to time. I had a president who was determined to grow endowments. And so, that president more or less mandated that we be thoughtful in that area. And so we were. That kind of probably changed over time, but number one, make sure you're aligned now with the strategic priorities of your institution. Don't expect those priorities to change significantly moving forward. But you've always got to be nimble enough that if there is some sort of new idea that gets presented and created as a priority, that you're able to address it.
Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you for joining me today. Thank you for providing all these insights. And I think it was extremely valuable for administrators who are or may in the future experience a presidential transition. So thank you for joining me.
Anthony, it's my pleasure. And I would just say, if you're in this business long enough, you're going to deal with it. And you're going to have some great experiences, and you're going to probably have some challenges just like the rest of us. But grateful to you and for the work that you're doing. And I appreciate the time.
Thanks, Jim.